Hey, what's going on, guys? Brian from Zombie Guitar here. This is part 6 of our chord tone soloing series. Alright, so in this part we are going to be going over all 5 of the caged positions and relating it to all 5 of the pentatonic positions. Okay, so for each of the possible caged positions, the C position, the A position, the G position, the E position, and the D position, there's an equivalent pentatonic position. Pentatonic 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Alright, so the pentatonic positions is just one way of organizing the fretboard. Just like the caged positions is another way of organizing the fretboard. Just like the 7 diatonic positions is another way of organizing the fretboard. These are all just fretboard organizational tools, okay? For the purpose of the chord tone soloing series, we're primarily focusing on caged because that gives you all your chord tones in any given area of the fretboard. Alright, so let's start out by taking a look at the fretboard here. Okay, this fretboard diagram that you see is in the key of G major / E minor. Okay, there's no tonic note indicated, but the major and its relative minor are always going to have the same notes. So this diagram here is G major / E minor. Okay, and if you wanted to view this in the context of a minor key, you see that now the white dots on the screen, that is your note E. So any white dot that you see is the note E. Alright, so you can come up here and this would be your home box. Alright, and your 12th fret of the low E string would be your note E. Here's your pentatonic minor scale, pentatonic position number 1. Here's an E. Here's an E. And then, okay, you also have a home box down here in your open position with your open E string being your E. Okay, that's also pentatonic position 1. And then every other position of the fretboard would be position 2, position 3, position 4, position 5, and then back to position 1, and then position 2, 3. Okay, so the pentatonic positions always go in numerical order. It always goes in the order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it starts back over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, moving this direction on the fretboard. Alright? Now, the pentatonic scale can also be viewed in the context of G major. Okay, notice that none of the notes actually changed. The only difference was the position of the tonic note. Alright, so now instead of our tonic note being E for the E minor pentatonic, our tonic note is now G for the G major pentatonic. Same set of notes, the only difference is the tonic note. Alright, so still we have our home box here. Alright, only our tonic note starts on the 15th fret, which is the note G. Okay, all the red notes are G, so. Okay, same set of notes, now we're in a major key. And again, we have our home box down here still. This is still position 1, this is still position 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. Okay, it's still the same thing, major, minor, doesn't matter. The only difference is the location of your tonic note. Okay, so that's viewing the fretboard diagram in the context of the pentatonic positions. Okay, so now let's view the fretboard in the context of the caged positions. Alright, so just as the pentatonic will always go in numerical order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the caged system will always go in the same order. It'll always go C, A, G, E, D, C, A, G, E, D, okay? So it's always going to spell the word caged and always move this direction of the fretboard, okay? So if we wanted to start out with the C position, okay, the way that you come up with the C position is you take your 1 chord of whatever key you're working in and you put that chord into the C shape. Okay, so right now we're working in the key of G major. Alright, so in the key of G major, your one chord is G. Your one chord is G major. Okay, so if you were to take your G major chord and put that in the C shape, your C shape would be found right here. Okay, here's your note G. You take that note G and you play the C shape of it. Okay, so right there, that little 4 fret range, that's your C position. Now your next position up the fretboard would be the A position. Okay, because that's the next letter in the word caged. So here's your A shape. Okay, then the next letter would be G. So here's your G position. Okay, so that's the G position. Now your E position is the next position. So your G major chord in the E shape. So that's your E position. Next chord is your D shape. So okay, so that's your that's your D position. All right, and then it starts over going this way too, except starting out down here, since we're in the key of G major, the lowest possible position would be the G position. Okay, so this is okay, so that's your G position down here. So in the key of G major, your lowest possible position on the fretboard in the key of G major is the G position, okay? And just recognize that that's just an open G chord. Okay, so then your next position up would be the E position, because that's the next letter in the word caged. So here's your G in the E shape. And then the next position up would be the D, okay, the D shape of the G chord. That's a tricky one to play as well, just playing the chords, or just playing the chord, but we're just looking for the available chord tones. So your D position, and then your next position is going to be C, because caged, and then it starts over. So C, and then A, and then G, and then E, and then D. Okay, caged, C-A-G-E-D, C-A-G-E-D, it always goes that. So that's basically how the caged positions get their name. Okay, it comes from the one chord, and now we're just going to relate every caged position to every pentatonic position. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at each one of these positions, each of these 5 positions, and see how each of the caged shape positions relates to each of the 5 pentatonic positions. So, since we're now focusing on caged rather than pentatonic, we're going to start off with C as our first position. Okay, so here's our C position, which is just our one chord in the C shape. So we're in the key of G. We're in the key of G major. So our one chord is G. So the G major chord in the C shape looks like this. And that overlaps directly with this pentatonic position. Okay. Now, if you were going by the pentatonic numbering system, this would be typically referred to as pentatonic position number 4. Alright, but you don't have to call this pentatonic position number 4 if you don't want to. If that confuses you, you can call it whatever you want. For the purposes of this chord tone soloing series, recall that in part 2 I simply referred to this as the A string home box. Alright, I call this the home box of the A string because your minor root is here and your major root is here, right on the A string. Okay, so pentatonic position number 4, A string home box position, whatever you want to call it. For the purposes of caged, it's the C position. Okay, so your one chord is right here. Okay, so those are your available chord tones for the one chord in this position. Okay, now keep in mind there's also other available chord tones in this position for the one chord. Okay, this is just the C shape, which fits nicely in here. Okay, but you also have a chord tone here. You also have a chord tone here. You also have a chord tone here. Okay, so yes, the C shape fits nicely in there, but there's also other chord tones of the G major chord right in this position, okay? So just keep that in mind for each of these positions and each of these shapes. The shapes are going to cover the chord tones, but you're also going to have other available chord tones, okay? So this would be your root, third, fifth, root, third, and then here's your fifth, here's a fifth, here's a third. Okay, so you're always going to have other thirds and fifths of the same chord within this position, okay? So that's your one chord, okay? So your two chord in this position is going to be, since we're in the key of G major, your two chord is going to be A minor. So located in this position, you have A minor in the D minor shape. Okay. So you have your A minor in the D minor shape, but you can also, you have other chord tones for the A minor chord available in this position as well. Other roots, thirds, and fifths of the A minor chord. Okay. So now let's take a look at our three chord. Our three chord in this position is B minor. So you have B minor in the E minor shape. Okay. And then you can also add in your additional chord tones as well. Okay, it's still just roots, thirds, and fifths of the B minor chord. Still the shape, but you still have a third here, you have a fifth here, you have a root here, you have a third, you have a fifth, you have a root, and you have a third. Okay? So that's your three chord. Your four chord in this position is going to be, since we're in the key of G major, your four chord is going to be the C major chord. Okay? That's C major in the E shape. And of course you have some additional chord tones available to you as well. Okay, now your five chord is going to be your D major chord. So you're going to find D major in the G shape here. Okay. And then you also have some additional chord tones as well. Actually just one for this shape. Alright, so that's your five chord. Now your six chord is going to be E minor. That's going to look like this. It's going to be in the A minor shape. Okay. And then you also have some additional chord tones as well for the E minor chord. Okay, so you have a fifth here. You have another third here. Okay, but this A minor shape fits very nicely in there. Okay, so this is pentatonic position number 4, or you can call it the A string home box position, or you can call it the C shape position. You can call it whatever you want, however you want to think of it in your head. Just know that it's this particular position for the key of G major / E minor. Okay, so if you wanted to view it from the perspective of E minor pentatonic, it would be. If you wanted to view it from the perspective of G major pentatonic, it would be. If you wanted to view it from the perspective of the C shape, then this would be your one chord. Okay, and then this would be your two chord, three chord, four chord, five chord, and then six chord. Okay, so all right there, you have all that stuff. Okay, now let's move on to the next caged shape. Okay, and relate it to the next pentatonic position. Okay, so the next caged shape you have would be the A position. Okay, we were previously at the C, so the next letter in the word caged is A, so now we're looking at the A position. A position is referring to your one chord in the A shape. Okay, so your one chord in the key of G major is G. Okay, so right here is your A position. Now this position overlaps with this pentatonic position. So this is your pentatonic position here. This is A position. Okay, so we have our 1 chord. Okay, and then you can add some additional chord tones for the G major chord into this position as well. Okay, now your 2 chord, which is A minor, doesn't really, there is no perfect A minor shape right here in this position, okay? So we do have some chord tones for A minor, but we don't have any of the minor shapes to fit right in this 4 fret area, okay? So if we were to shift up a little bit, here's your A minor chord. So you see you have some of those chord tones there. Or if you were to shift down a little bit, you have your A minor chord here. So you see you have some of those chord tones there, but there's no perfect A minor, or there's no perfect caged shape that fits right into this spot, okay? So just keep that in mind. So it's for the 3 chord, okay, for the 3 chord, which is your B minor chord, you do have a chord that fits in there, okay? So you have your B minor chord in the D minor shape. Okay, so B minor in the D minor shape. And then you can add in your additional chord tones for the B minor chord. Alright, and then your 4 chord in this position, which is C major, there is no perfect shape that fits into this position for C major, okay? So you do have a little bit of, you have some of the parts of this C major shape and some of the parts of this C major shape, which is C major in the D shape or C major in the E shape here, but no particular shape that fits directly into this 4 fret area, okay? Alright, so then your 5 chord would be your D major chord. Okay, you have D major right here in the E shape. And then any additional chord tones could be fit in there. And then your 6th chord would be E minor. Alright, and again, E minor doesn't really have a shape. Your 6th chord doesn't really have a shape that fits perfectly into this position. Alright, so you have an E minor in the E minor shape up here. So some of your chord tones are there, and then you have an E minor in the A minor shape down here. So some of your chord tones there. But, so this position is a little weird. This position doesn't have perfect shapes for all of your chords, okay? So your 1 chord is in there, your 2 chord does not have a nice shape, your 3 chord does have a nice shape, your 4 chord does not have a nice shape, your 5 chord does have a nice shape, and your 6 chord does not. Okay, so this is kind of a weird position, but viewing it in terms of pentatonic, okay, viewing it in terms of caged, this is just the A position, but your other chords don't fit perfectly in there, okay? So now let's look at the G position. Okay, the G position of the caged is right here. Okay, take your G major chord in the G shape, and you end up right in this area. This is what I refer to as the home box. Alright, so part 1 of this series, I talked about the home box. If you were to view the fretboard from the perspective of the pentatonic scale, this would be known as pentatonic position number 1. Okay, but since we're referring to this in terms of caged, this is the G position. Okay, so your 1 chord is here. Alright, and any additional chord tones for the G major, you just have this. Okay, so that's your 1 chord in the home box. Your 2 chord, which is A minor, does have a nice shape, has a nice A minor shape. Okay. So your additional chord tones, okay, you have a 5th here, you have a 3rd here, and your nice A minor shape. Your 3 chord is the B minor. So in this position, in your home box position, or pentatonic position number 1, or G position, whatever you want to call it. You're not going to find a 3 chord. Okay, you're going to find some chord tones, some coming from here, and some coming from here. Okay, or this arpeggio shape. Okay, some coming from that arpeggio shape, but there's no perfect caged shape for the 3 chord in this position. Alright? Your 4 chord, you have your C in the C shape, C major in the C shape. Okay, so that one fits nicely in there. And then you have some available chord tones as well. Okay, and then you have your D chord in the D shape. Okay, with some additional chord tones. And then you have your 6th chord, which is the E minor in the E minor shape. Okay, with some additional chord tones as well. We're going to come down here. You could continue up here on the fretboard if you wanted, on the 15th fret, but it's the same thing as down here, so we're just going to come down here because it's easier to explain with larger frets. Okay, so down here is your E position. Okay, so you're taking your 1 chord, you're putting it into the E shape, giving you the E position. Okay, and note this is the position that we focused on in part 3 of this series. Alright, so G chord, 1 chord in the E shape, and then your respective pentatonic position would look like this. Okay, so that's your respective pentatonic position. That's your 1 chord. And then any additional chord tones. Okay, so that's all the chord tones for your 1 chord. Now your 2 chord. Your 2 chord doesn't really fit nicely into this position. Okay, so you have your A minor in the E minor shape up here. So some of the chord tones are found coming from that shape. You also have an A minor here. So some of the chord tones are found from that shape, but there's no perfect shape directly in this 4 fret area for the 2 chord. Okay, so your 3 chord is your B minor chord. Okay, so we're working in this 4 fret area, so you do have your 3 chord, which fits nicely in there. That's the B minor chord in the A minor shape, and then you have all your additional chord tones for the B minor chord. Okay, and then you have your 4 chord, which fits nicely in this position. Your 4 chord is your C major, which fits right in here in the A shape, so it's the A shape of the C major chord. Okay, so you have that, and then you have your additional chord tones for the C major chord. So that's your 4 chord. Now your 5 chord would be the D major chord. Your D major chord is going to be found in the C shape here. Okay, D major in the C shape, and your additional chord tones as well for the D major chord. And then you will find your 6th chord, which is your E minor chord, in the D minor shape here. Okay, and your additional chord tones for that as well. Okay, so you have your 1 chord, then you have your 2 chord, which doesn't quite fit nicely in here, but it's half of this and half of this. Okay, you have your 3 chord, which does fit nicely. You have your 4 chord, which fits nicely. You have your 5 chord, and you have your 6 chord. That's all right in this pentatonic position. Alright, so now on to the last pentatonic position. The last pentatonic position is your D position. So you take your G major chord, your 1 chord, and you put that in the D shape. Okay, so your D shape of your G major is right here. This is a tricky one to play just as a chord. Okay, that's G in the D shape. Okay, your respective pentatonic scale would be this. Okay, so right there, that's your pentatonic position. So, our one chord we already determined was right here in the D shape. Okay, and you can take and add your additional chord tones for the G major chord. Okay, now your 2 chord is your A minor chord. You're going to find that in this E minor shape here, A minor in the E minor shape, with additional chord tones. Okay, additional chord tones for the A minor. Then you have your 3 chord. So your 3 chord doesn't quite fit nicely into the shape, okay, because your 3 chord is up here, and your 3 chord's also down here. So this position has, this position uses some of this shape and some of that shape, and some of that arpeggio, but no perfect shape for the 3 chord. Okay. Now your 4 chord, you're going to find your C major chord in the G shape here. Okay, G shape. That's a tricky one to play. Okay, this note's also chord tone here. Okay, 4 chord in the G shape. 5 chord is your D major chord, right in the A shape. Okay, plus your additional chord tones. 6 chord would be your E minor chord, but this chord doesn't quite fit nicely in here either, because here's an E minor here in the A minor shape, and here's an E minor down here in the D minor shape, but there's no real minor shape for your 6 chord in this position. Okay, but you do have your 1 chord fitting nicely, your 2 chord fitting nicely, your 3 chord not so nicely, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, your 4 chord, which is the C, your 5 chord, which is the D, and your 6 chord, which doesn't quite fit so nicely, a little bit of this, and a little bit of this, okay, and the respective pentatonic scale. Alright, so that's the 5th position. And then when you want to start over, you're back here at this position, which is your C position again, okay? And then your A position, and then your G, E, D, C, G, so it always spells caged. Okay, recommended practice. How you might practice this stuff, okay? Unless you're some sort of genius, it's going to be very difficult for you to take in all the information that I gave you today, which covers the entire fretboard, which covers an entire system spanning, 22 to 24 frets and 6 strings. To take all that in, it's going to take months to years, okay? It doesn't happen overnight. So, number one, that's why I'm making this part 6 of the series. That, so we can, the earlier parts of the series just focused on one position at a time. But recommended practice to really get this cage stuff down is you could lay down a chord progression, pick a key, for the sake of example, since we're in the key of G major, lay down a chord progression in the key of G major. Maybe use the G major chord, maybe use the B minor chord, maybe use the D major chord, and then kind of just loop those 3 chords over and over, okay? And then practice in each of your positions, okay? Practice in each of the 5 caged positions. Your chord progression is going to be looping over and over. Practice number 1, just playing pentatonic stuff, disregarding all your chord tones. Number 2, you could practice just using your diatonic scale, okay, disregarding chord tones. Number 3, you could start implementing just your chord tones. So as the G is occurring, you could just be playing your, the notes from the G chord, G major chord. As the B minor chord is occurring, you could be playing just the notes of your B minor chord. As the D major chord is occurring, you could be playing just the notes of your D major chord in whatever position you happen to be practicing in. Then the next step might be to start connecting the scale to the chords. So as the G major chord moves from G major to B minor, you could be playing some chord tones of G major, and then you could start playing some scale tones, not necessarily chord tones, to allow you to move from G to B minor. And then when the G minor chord occurs, you could land on a note of a B minor chord. Okay? And then during the transition from B minor to D major, you could again use some scale tones as your passing tones or your transition tones to move from, to chord tones of the D major chord. Okay? So you could do that for any of the 5 positions. You just want to get good at relating the chords to the scales is basically what I'm trying to say, okay? It's all the same thing. The chord tones really highlight the underlying, the chord tones outline the underlying chord progression. The scale tones are just paths to walk from one chord to the next, if you want to look at it like that, okay? So that's recommended practice. So do that for each of the positions, the C position, the A position, G, E, and D position. Or if you want to think of it in terms of pentatonic, you can do it that way too. Pentatonic 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, locating your chord tones within each of the positions. Okay, and then some final words on this whole thing. So this is a relatively complex system. Just like every system for the guitar is complex, this is no different. But you are going to start recognizing some patterns. So you're going to start recognizing that every time you have a chord played in the C shape, for instance, so say you're in the key of G major and you have your G major is your 1 chord. So you take your 1 chord in the C shape. Okay. Not only are those your chord tones, but you're also going to have your additional chord tones. Okay, so you have a 5th here, you have a 3rd here, and you have your root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th. Okay, so you have some additional chord tones which surround this particular shape, and the location of those additional chord tones are here, here, and here. Okay, so anytime you have any chord in the C shape, those chord tones, additional chord tones, are always going to be found in the same spot. So in the key of G major, down in this position, okay, you have a D major chord in the C shape. Okay, D major is part of the key of G major. Okay, so your G major down in this position is in this shape. Your D major chord is in the C shape. And anytime you have a major chord in the C shape, you know your additional chord tones are going to be here, here, and here. Okay, so it's always going to be like that. Same thing for any of the chords, okay? Anytime you have a particular chord in a particular shape, the additional chord tones are always going to be found, and it's always going to be the same for any chord in that particular chord shape, okay? So I don't want to overload you with too much information. I just want you to start to think and start to recognize patterns, because there's a lot of patterns on the guitar. The more you play, the more you practice, the more you start to learn theory, the more patterns you're going to start to recognize, okay? So pay attention to the patterns that start to emerge, because that's going to make your understanding of these systems, such as the CAGED system, make a lot more sense and come a lot easier to you, okay? So that's going to be it for this lesson. This isn't going to be the end of the chord tone soloing series. We have a few more parts to come, but this is a long one, so you may want to watch this video a few times. If I left anything out, or if I was confusing in any way, feel free to message me, and I'll gladly get back to you. Thanks a lot.